was a young woman named Elva Zona Shue who lived in Greenbrier County in West Virginia. She was married to a man named Edward who worked as a blacksmith. They seemed very happy together, but Zona's mother never liked Edward Shue and warned her daughter not to trust him. One day, after they had been married only 3 months, Edward sent a young African-American boy named Andy Jones to his house on an errand. He was supposed to ask Zona if there was anything she needed from the store. The boy found Zona's body lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes were wide open and staring right at him. She was dead. The boy ran home to tell his mother, and she raised the alarm. Edward went home, carried his wife's body up to the bedroom, and dressed her in her Sunday best. When the coroner arrived an hour later, he found the dead woman wearing a stiff-collared dress that covered her neck, and she had a veil over her face. Edward was cradling his wife's head and sobbing hysterically. When the coroner tried to take a closer look, Edward reacted so violently that the coroner gave up and left. He listed her cause of death as being due to childbirth. The strangest thing about it was that Zona had not even been pregnant. When Zona's mother found out her daughter was dead, she shouted, "The devil has killed her." During the funeral, Zona's mother took a sheet from inside the coffin and brought it home. When she washed it in a basin, the water turned as red as blood. The old woman believed this was a sign that Zona had been murdered. Every night for the next 4 weeks, Zona's mother prayed that the truth about her daughter's death would be revealed. She didn't have long to wait. One night, the ghost of Zona appeared to her mother and told her exactly how she had died. She said Edward was cruel and abusive to her. One day, he went too far. She told him she had no meat for his dinner, and Edward flew into a rage. He attacked his wife and broke her neck. When she said this, the ghost slowly turned her head completely around at the neck. The next morning, Zona's mother went to the police and told them what she had seen. Although they were skeptical, they dug up Zona's body again and performed a proper autopsy. When he heard the news, Edward began to get nervous and stressed out. He wandered around the town saying, "They will not be able to prove I did it." The autopsy revealed that Zona's neck had been broken and she had been strangled to death. On her throat were the marks of fingers. Edward Shue was arrested and charged with murder. When the police investigated his background, they found some suspicious facts. Edward had a violent temper. He had beaten his first wife severely and thrown her out of the house. His second wife had died mysteriously of a blow to the head. As he sat in his jail cell, Edward was sure he would not be convicted of Zona's murder. He told everyone who would listen that there was no evidence against him. During the trial, Zona's mother was called to testify on the stand. She told the jury how Zona's ghost had appeared to her and revealed the name of her murderer. Nobody knows if the jury took her story seriously, but they did come back with a guilty verdict, and Edward was sentenced to life in prison. He died a few years later in Moundsville Penitentiary. The hand towel is a scary story about an old woman who has a filthy old rag she uses to clean her house. There was an old woman who ran a boarding house. She made a living by renting out the rooms to men who worked at a nearby chemical factory. Her house was run down and dilapidated, and the old woman was not very clean. She kept a hand towel in the kitchen to mop up spills. She also used it to clean the house. The hand towel was covered in dirt, grease, and grime. It was more like an old rag, and it smelled disgusting. One day, while she was dusting one of the rooms, the old lady accidentally dropped the filthy old hand towel. It fell down behind a radiator and got stuck. When she couldn't reach it, the old lady simply left it there and forgot about it. The man who rented the room was a lonely and cantankerous old fellow who had no family. The old house was cold and damp, so the man turned the radiator on full blast to keep warm. One morning, the old man didn't come down to breakfast. The old woman knocked on his door, but there was no answer. She used her keys to open the door, turned the knob, and went in. What she discovered horrified her. The old man was lying dead in his bed. His skin was cold and his face was blue. It looked like he had been smothered in his sleep. The police came, took a look at the dead body, asked a few questions, and left. The corpse was taken down to the morgue. The old man was a nobody, so no one cared that much whether he lived or died. The police decided that he had probably smothered accidentally in the blankets. They never even noticed the trail of slime that led across the pillow and onto his face. A few days later, the old woman put a notice in the newspaper advertising a room for rent. Not long after that, she had a new tenant. He was a young man who was very nervous and smoked cigarettes constantly. On the first night he spent in the room, the young man was laying in bed, smoking a cigarette. He thought he heard something shuffling about in the darkness, but he paid no attention to it. Things were always making noises in old houses. He reached over to stub his cigarette out in the ashtray, but his hand touched something damp and slimy. It felt like a wet cloth. Suddenly, the thing curled around his wrist. The young man gasped and pulled his hand back, dropping his cigarette. The thing around his wrist burst into flames. Before he could so much as scream, the thing flew off his hand and landed on his face, covering his nose and mouth. The old woman was awakened by the sound of sirens outside. There were fire engines pulling up outside her house, and she could smell smoke. When the fire was put out, most of the old house had been gutted. The young man's charred corpse was found still lying in his bed. The fire department decided that the blaze was caused by the young man's stupid and dangerous habit of smoking in bed. The old woman had insurance, so she collected a large sum of money and bought a new house. She never wondered what happened to the filthy old hand towel she dropped down the back of the radiator. The Three Girls is a scary ghost story about a taxi driver who is out working when he picks up some strange customers by the side of the road. One evening, a taxi driver was driving through the city when he spotted three girls standing by the side of the road with their hands raised. They were trying to flag him down. It had been a quiet night and business was slow, so he was glad to have some customers. The taxi driver pulled over and stopped to pick them up. "Where are you girls going?" he asked as they jumped into the back seat. They told him they needed to go to the hospital. One of the girls had a pain in her stomach, and she wanted to see a doctor. The taxi driver glanced at the girl and noticed that she was doubled over in pain. Her face was very pale and she was crying. The taxi driver realized it was an emergency, so he drove as fast as he could to the nearest hospital. When they arrived, the taxi driver looked back and saw that the girl was now extremely sick. She was sweating profusely and moaning in agony. The other girls told him they wanted to stay with their friend and begged him to go inside and fetch a doctor. The taxi driver nodded his head and ran over to the hospital's front desk. He found a nurse and told her that he had a very sick girl in his car. He asked her if she could go out, have a look at her to make sure she was all right. The nurse agreed and went out to where the taxi was parked, leaving the taxi driver waiting at the front desk. A few minutes later, the nurse came running back to the front desk, her face red. "What's going on?" she demanded. The taxi driver had no idea what she was talking about. "What did you do to those girls?" cried the nurse. "What do you mean?" asked the bewildered taxi driver. "I've already called the police," said the nurse. "You better stay here until they arrive. Maybe you can explain to them why you have 3 dead bodies in your car." According to the nurse, 3 college girls had been driving in the area when they had a terrible accident. They were trapped in the burning wreckage, and when the ambulance brought them to hospital, there was little the doctors could do for them. In spite of all their efforts, all 3 of the girls died. Their bodies had been placed in the hospital mortuary. However, the dead bodies in the taxi were unmistakably those of the 3 college girls. "What were you trying to do by stealing the bodies from our hospital?" the furious nurse demanded to know. "I assure you," replied the shaken taxi driver, "when I picked those girls up, they were very much alive." Needless to say, the place where the taxi driver picked up the girls was the exact same place where the accident had happened, and the girls were burned alive.